Welcome in to the Lady Vol Basketball Fever podcast, part of Vol Basketball Fever. We're a show dedicated exclusively to talking about the Lady Vols and news around the program. Tune in to hear thoughts and discussions from experts who cover the Lady Vols on a daily basis. Now, here's a new episode of the Lady Vol Basketball Fever podcast. Hello, everyone, and welcome into another episode of the Lady Vol Basketball Fever podcast. I am Nathanael Rutherford, joined by special guest Coral Hall of Knox News. She covers all of Lady Vols athletics for Knox News, here specifically talking about Lady Vol basketball. So, Cora, thank you for hopping on the show again.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, so I haven't had you on since the season has been over for Lady Vol basketball, so I wanted to get you on here to talk about all these transfers that Tennessee and Kelly Harper and her staff have been getting, because it's been a lot, and we haven't had a chance to really talk. I think last time you were on might have been right before the start of the NCAA tournament, so I think we may have talked about Jazz Powell at that point, but even then it was more talking about postseason stuff. So I want to get you on to talk about that, but before we begin all that, I want to say thank you to all of you who are tuning in here, whether you're listening on your podcast app of choice or if you're on YouTube. Thank you so much. Leave this like on this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet on YouTube, and also subscribe to the podcast and leave us a nice 5-star review if you haven't yet on Apple Podcast or Spotify as well. Well, Cora, want to hop in here. Tennessee has now added 4 players from the transfer portal, along with also bringing in 5-star Justine Passat in recruiting. The 2 most recent additions, I don't think we've really talked about a ton on here on the show, so I wanted to talk about the 2 newest additions to Tennessee's roster officially, and that being 2 more post players for Tennessee, and Jasmine Franklin, who is a transfer from Missouri State, who played under Coach Kelly Harper at Missouri State, which I do believe I talked about with Kellyanne Stitz last episode a little bit, but I want to get your take on her as well. But also the newest one is Jillian Hollingshed, who I believe I'm pronouncing that last name correctly, transferring from Georgia, where she spent her freshman season there. A 6'5" post who, you got to imagine, will be taking over and filling the shoes of Tamari Key once she moves on, but also providing some really good support and backup for Tamari this season. Was a former 5-star prospect who I believe Tennessee had recruited when she was coming out of high school before this past season. Played in, I think, 20 games for Georgia, battled illness and then also injury, so didn't get to, never really quite reached her ceiling this past year as a true freshman, but she did kind of, when she came back, bounce back pretty well in the NCAA tournament for Georgia, put up 15 points against Dayton in their first round victory over them. Cora, we'll get into kind of more how these players and stuff we think could fit into the roster here in a minute, but overall, I mean, I think the last things you really needed to address was post depth. I think if Jasmine is healthy, she really fits into that Alexis Dye role that that Alexis is leaving behind. They're both built kind of similarly. It looked like when healthy, aside from the injury that Jasmine Franklin, that she had the kind of moves and skill set that Alexis brought and the tenacity that she brought as well. And of course, Jillian has, I think, a really high ceiling and can learn from one of the best post players in the SEC this year in Tamari Key, but also provide some actual quality depth and have another quality 5 there that Tennessee didn't really have. You had Caroline Strickland, who played some 5 this year because Kean Green went down, but I think you feel more comfortable with Caroline at the 4. I think Jillian, to me, brings in a really legitimate, post presence there at the 5 to spell Tamari if she gets in foul trouble or just needs a breather.
Yeah, I think the thing with Jillian is, she brings great size. Caroline's a great post player. Like, she has a great future ahead of her, but she's not, 6'4", 6'5", 6'6". So she just brings that length and kind of what my impression from their transfer portal recruiting is. When I talked with Sam, she said they're looking at immediate needs and who can make immediate impacts and what they need right away in the fall. And they certainly filled that void of, there was injuries that impacted their post depth, but now it's almost like you have all the post depth you could want on a team at this point, because they all are a little bit different, right? You've got Franklin's a little bit shorter, but she, just looking at her film that I could find online, got great moves, is a great scorer and great rebounder. She was second in the nation in rebounding before she got hurt. And I believe that was only partially into the season. So she's had a long time to recover. So I feel like, her health isn't probably going to be a huge concern besides keeping her healthy, right? She'll have had a lot of time to recover from that, which is good. And then, Jillian is, she's got a lot of skills for, like she's not like a traditional center in that sense, right? She's more of like the centers that we're going to see more and more, who can shoot from farther range and who can stretch the floor, who can take, have great ball handling skills. And so I think she's going to also provide a different look. And when I was looking at the roster the other day, it's just, there's so much size on this team now, right? There's only 4 players who are under 6 feet tall. So there's a lot of different lineups that you can create with this team because you have size at every position. You have size at the 2, the 3. I mean, Jordan Horson provides size as a point guard if you want to run her at that. So you could potentially have a lineup of everyone over 6'1". And that's something that is going to be a game changer for them, because that's what South Carolina, I feel like, had that nobody else really had last year, was like size, so much size on the floor at once that it was like defensively they were just going to stifle you. So I think with Justine at 6'4" playing at the wing, she played 2, 3. She wants to post up. She could post up because if you have her at the wing, she can post up guards, and then you have Rickea Jackson, who's 6'2", and you just have so many different looks that you can do, so many different lineups. And Kelly likes to play deep into her, into her bench. So she's going to definitely utilize that, the different looks they can have on the floor depending on matchups.
Yeah, and that kind of leads into kind of the next point I want to talk about, looking at all 5 of these newcomers of that are joining the team that were on the team last year, with Jasmine Powell, transfer point guard. You have Rickea Jackson, you just mentioned, transferring from Mississippi State. Justine Passat, 5-star freshman coming in, and then the 2 transfers we just talked about with Franklin and Jillian coming in. Like you said, I mean, you have post depth, and they all kind of do different things. Tamari is the best shot blocker in Tennessee history. I mean, literally in the record books for that. Probably one of, if not the best shot blocker in SEC history by the time she's graduated. But you have her as, and her offense has come along as well, and it's gotten better. So I think if she continues to develop that and maybe gets another move or two, could really take off in her final year at Tennessee. But like you said, Jillian Hollingshed also has like really good offensive skills. She's more, I think, has a higher ceiling on that end than Tamari. I'll be interested to see defensively what she can do also. But I think offensively you'll see more from the post from Tennessee this year, instead of it being feeding Tamari and letting her do things, but then Alexis Dye coming on as the year carried on as well. I think it'd be really intriguing to see this year what kind of offense you get from those post players, but also you have a legit true point guard, because hats off to goodness, yeah, I'm just suddenly forgetting her name, the point guard for the last couple of seasons for Lady Vols. Golly, thank you. Yeah, Jordan Walker. I kept thinking Jordan, but I was like, I couldn't think of the last name. Jordan Walker did a great job as a point guard the last couple of seasons, even though that's not her true position that she came in playing. She played as a 2 guard and was asked to play point guard, and she did a good job of it. But now you have someone who it's been her job the last basically all her career as a basketball player is playing point guard, and Jazz Powell. So that's going to be intriguing to me. I think, to me, Cora, looking at the additions that are coming in, it's interesting. You can talk about starting lineups all you want, but like you just said, and I think we've talked about with, I talked about Kellyanne, I talked about with Maria when she was last on too. I don't know that you're not gonna see the same starting 5 from beginning to end of this year. Hopefully not because of injury, but mostly because you have such a varied skill set. You can go small ball if you need to, or I guess quote unquote small ball, like you said. You have guards who are 6'2" on the team, so technically small ball from a skill set perspective, I guess. Or you can play better. You can have Tamari and Jillian and Caroline and Rickea all out there at the same time if you need to. I mean, you have I don't think that would be one you'd see a whole lot, but you have options to play 2 or 3 post players and really a point guard and a shooting guard, and that be your lineup. You have so many varied options. I think though, if you're looking at a minute allocation, I think Rickea and Jazz of the new additions get more minutes than the other ones. But I really think it'd be interesting to me to see what does Justine Passat do, because she's talented, but she's the only actual true freshman coming in on this team. You have all the freshmen who played last year are going to be sophomores this year, and they're obviously very skilled. and you have, our returning seniors, you have returning juniors, you have a lot of experience and depth on this team. And as you just said, like Kelly Harper has shown she will play those players and she'll play the young players. But I'm really interested to see how much playing time we see a Jillian Hollingshed. And, well, I mean, I think Jillian will get a decent amount because she'll spell Tamari and maybe even be out there at the same time at sometimes too. But like Justine Pissot, like how much playing time does she get? Because I don't think you really need, like, hopefully you're not having to count and rely on her unless she just comes in as like obviously lives up to 5-star potential and is demanding minutes. But I think it's going to be really interesting to see the rotation this year. And once it plays out, who does that get narrowed down to with the 8-9, like kind of players you like to play? Because there's only so many minutes in a game that you can give to players. And there's a lot of players on this roster who are good enough to start and good enough to play 20 minutes a game. And I think it's just, this is the deepest, on paper at least, team I've seen from Lady Vols in a very long time.
Yeah, I think the thing with Justine, the thing that she has that they have been missing so badly is 3-point shooting.
Mm-hmm.
She can shoot. She can shoot from the logo at this point. She has so much range, and I think, I mean, I don't know if she starts right away, but she's going to be getting minutes right away. I don't see any way around that, because the last 2 seasons, they relied on Tess for that 3-point shooting last year, but, she had streaks of hot and cold, and that's something that's Justine has been doing for years, is just pulling up from deep and hitting them. I mean, she is a great shooter, and that kid works hard. I was talking to her family the other week. I saw a story on her come out, but just the work ethic in that family and her, I don't think she's going to come in and be, she might be internally a little nervous, but I don't think she's going to be intimidated by the talented roster. I think she's going to come in and make a pretty immediate impact, just because I think with the thing with her and Rakia and I would say probably Jordan Horson too, they're very versatile guards. Their versatility is one of their greatest strengths, because they can score in so many different ways, and they can, facilitate different kinds of things on offense. And so I think that is going to be a major factor. And when's the last time you saw a 6'4" guard? I mean, 6'4" wing, basically. I mean, she's a shooting guard, but she'll play at the wing, and when's the last time you saw that in the women's game? I feel like that's so rare. If you're 6'4", you're getting thrown at, you're probably going to be a 4 or 5. But because she had a growth spurt late, she was 6'2" until when she originally committed. So that is something that not a lot of teams are going to have an answer for. If you have, whoever you want, I would say Jazz Powell is probably going to start at point guard. I don't know how you have a player who averaged almost 6 assists in the Big Ten and you don't start her. Mm-hmm. I mean, she's probably, I would say she starts. If I had to choose, I would pick her. So if you're going to have her, but then you could have 3 players on the floor at once who are 6'4" and taller. That's really hard to compete with. So yeah, I don't know. I think Justine still has a really good shot at earning a lot of minutes, just because there isn't anyone else returning who would shoot the 3 like that. And I don't think any of the transfers would be, I mean, Rakia can shoot the 3 obviously, but I know she didn't take as many, and that could have just been schematically what they wanted from her at Mississippi State. But Justine can shoot the 3, and they need that.
You're talking about last 6'4" guard you saw. In my mind, immediately actually did go to Candace Parker, but she's not a guard, but she can shoot the 3 and she's 6'4".
Yeah. Well, so I mean, she's listed as on her position, guard, forward, center. That was... She
literally probably can play 1 through 5 just about on a core. But yeah, that was the first thing that popped in my head. I was like, well, Candace Parker's the only one I could think of. That was a really good point. I mean, that was the thing last year, that and consistent free throw shooting and turnovers, those 3 areas, 3-point shooting, turnover numbers, and inconsistent free throws were the biggest issues with this team, aside from injuries, which you can't help that. But things that could help were those 3 areas, and I think did a really good job addressing all of those. The free throw shooting will remain to be seen, but I think addressing 3-point shooting with Justine Pissot, I think, like you say, Rakia is capable of hitting 3s, but also it's not even just a case of you being a good 3-point shooter on your own. Like, it's a case of if the offense gives you open looks. And I think bringing in Jazz Powell, who's, you said, averaged almost 6 assists in the Big Ten, like, that's impressive. Her being able to distribute and be a true point guard, have that vision, I think is going to help everyone. It's going to help out Jordan Walker. Jordan Walker playing off ball might help her shooting percentages as well. So like, it's just the whole team, I think, is going to be different and look different. And that's one of the things when I've talked to both, excuse me, both Jazz Powell and Rickea Jackson, both here on the show, that they both mentioned is that Kelly Harper told them, like, she wants to move faster. She wants to run faster. She wants to play at a higher paced tempo moving forward. And that was one of the reasons, that both those players ended up coming to Tennessee and why they both were targeted by this staff. Cora, I think that's going to be really interesting to see is how much does Tennessee push the tempo next year, or I guess how much more do they push the tempo? How much more defensively are they going to press? Like, I think this could be probably the most aggressive Tennessee team also that I've seen in a long time, because just at least from talk wise of what Kelly Harper has been saying, she wants to push the ball more. She wants to, put the pressure on the opposing defense and put pressure on their offense too. Like, this could be a team that goes from turning the ball over a lot last year to all of a sudden forcing a ton of turnovers by opponents, and also limiting, cutting down the turnovers by themselves this year too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's going to be a major focus, cutting down turnovers and playing faster. And I think with Jazz Powell and with Rickea Jackson, you're going to get that, those two, Jordan Horston in transition, that can be a lot of points. I just think it's going to be a very exciting roster. And I think it's going to be really interesting to watch Kelly manage the talent that she's bringing in, because she has a loaded roster, like genuinely loaded roster. So just seeing how she manages that will be interesting. And I'm very excited to kind of see how things shake out, because like you said, I feel like as a coach, you want to kind of have a somewhat consistent starting lineup. I don't think that's going to change up a ton, but maybe at the beginning, you'll see certain people slide in here or there, or just if there's a game where like, okay, we want to start really big. But I think you'll probably find a pretty consistent starting five in there. Yeah. And I think in my mind, I would say Powell's got to start, Horston, Jackson, Key, and then that fourth spot, I think, is kind of, who wants it.
That's a good point. I think currently it would be Walker, just based on her experience and her play at much as she's played and how she's played at Tennessee. But you make a good point. Like, you can go a number of different ways there. You could start a more true shooting guard like Jordan Walker there, or you can go. You have any of the returning sophomores you could put there. You have, like you said, Justine could earn a starting spot. Like that spot right there is going to be or even heck, like I said, Jasmine Franklin could end up taking that spot, and you have more of just a bigger starting lineup. So yeah, that fourth spot, however you want to play it, that's kind of the X factor that could change the most this year.
Yeah, I think for Justine, I think it's probably just going to depend on how quickly are you in the system, how quickly are you getting these reps and finding that groove within the offense. So, that's kind of remains to be seen, but I mean, she seems like a really smart player. So I don't think it will take her, too long to adjust to that. But I think that'll probably be, you just got to see her live at the college level basically and see how she handles it.
Well, we already know, we're barely into May at this point right now, Cora. But expectations are already being talked about for this team in terms of how high are they going to be, how high should they be. A lot of people are already saying with the way the roster is, it's they should make a Final Four. And I do legit think they will be a Final Four contender. Like they're going to be, as long as everything kind of meshes together, because that's going to be, you mentioned it, like the biggest, I think really the biggest question mark for Coach Harper this year is going to be roster management. And how do you keep, like I said, technically how do you keep everyone happy, but also how do you find, finding that right chemistry, finding the right rotations and stuff as the season goes on is going to be a difficult task. It's a good problem to have. It's much better to have a loaded roster and then try to figure out than having a depleted roster and having to play someone just because you don't have anyone else there. But looking at kind of early season expectations, we can talk about kind of all we want to about my personal expectations for the team or yours or any of the fans listening here or anyone else listening. Period. but I think it's interesting to look kind of at national perspective, because I think this came out earlier this week from ESPNW, Charlie Cream, who does a lot of the ESPNW coverage for ESPN. He also does, I think, all the bracketology stuff for them as well. Released his kind of updated, way too early top 25. And there was a lot of discussion about where the Lady Vols fell. You have number one South Carolina, which that's not a surprise. They just won a title and they return a lot of the same players from that team, and they're going to be very, very talented. UConn number two, which I think is also kind of interesting. Stanford number three, Texas number four, Iowa at number five, which you and I were talking before we started recording here. That's I feel a little higher than I would have put them. And then Tennessee at number six, where he says about the Lady Vols is enough votes are now in, and Kelly Harper has won the offseason so far. Early in the transfer process, probable starters were Kia Jackson and Jasmine Powell committed to the Lady Vols. Then Harper was able to add Jasmine Franklin, who is the nation's second leading rebounder before a December knee injury cost her the rest of the season. Then on Monday of this past week, 6'5" Jillian Hollingshed, a 2021 McDonald's All-American, landed in Knoxville after leaving Georgia following her freshman year. With Franklin Hollingshed and a 6'5" Tamari Key, which she's 6'6", but okay. Tennessee might be an even better rebounding team than last year's edition that was second in the country. With Powell sliding in at the point, top scorer Jordan Horston will have even more freedom off the ball. The talent is there in Knoxville. It'll just look different from last season. So having them at six, like I think, okay, that's fine. I think they will be, by the time we get to the beginning of the season, core, I think they're going to be a top five team, maybe even top four. Again, it doesn't really matter what media thinks of you in preseason. Preseason expectations or preseason rankings don't really mean anything. It's just a nice kind of way to get a season hyped up, or to, I guess, give you a perceived slight, if you want to take it that way, for certain teams too. But I think having Tennessee at number six, I mean, that's really high, but it doesn't feel high enough to me. Like, I think this team will be, by the time it's all said and done, by the AP and coaches or whatever, by the time we get to October, I guess, of this year, they'll be I think they should be a top five, maybe even top four team in preseason, because I think just this roster alone is so deep and so stacked and so experience heavy that, I mean, it should be them in South Carolina 1-2 in the SEC. And I don't know that we'll talk some more about SEC transfers in basketball in a second, but I don't see, barring a rash of injuries or barring like things just not meshing and gelling, I don't see how Tennessee and South Carolina aren't, the top two favorites by a somewhat, I wouldn't say long shot, but at least a somewhat comfortable margin compared to the rest of the SEC. And if you're 1-2 in the SEC, you're a top five team in women's basketball for sure.
Yeah, I think, preseason rankings are difficult, and I feel like every time, maybe the top three teams end up being those top three, because you just know, sometimes you just know those top few teams. But I think maybe the question mark with Tennessee is the fact that so many are transfers, the top talent, probable starters, transfers. So it's a matter of, bringing that all together, and, you can have all the talent in the world, and if you don't have the right chemistry, it's not going to work out. So I think, that could have been a question mark there. But I mean, if you look at the talent wise, they're definitely a top five team in the country. But I think it's just that the fact that so much of the talent is just now going to come in, and then they have the summer to put everything together, and then October will be here before we know it, and then so, I mean, I think, people here have seen what Kelly can do with, when it comes to building culture, when it comes to building team chemistry. But yeah, there might just be, and I think, there's still that recency of what Iowa did at the end of the regular season, winning the Big Ten tournament, that's a pretty big deal. So, I mean, they're returning good pieces, definitely, but I would definitely have put Tennessee probably at number 5 on that list.
So I know, again, it's we're still early. It's still May. But what, in your mind, Cora, what are your kind of very early expectations for this team? Because I'm not, again, South Carolina's going to be very hard to upend. But I think Tennessee, at this point, has the roster to do it. I just don't know that I'm ready to go out and say that this team's going to win the SEC or that this team's going to make a Final Four. Because again, getting to the NCAA tournament, it's all about matchups. It's all about seeding, basically, too, like where you're lined up and how you're lined up. Like it's more or less it's called March Madness for a reason. It's kind of a crapshoot. You kind of sometimes the best team doesn't always win it. This year, I think that was the case. The best team did win it. At South Carolina. I think it is more true in the women's game still, even though we are seeing year in, year out now, March Madness is becoming crazy. We talked about before, last time we were on, like upsets are going to happen, and you predicted several of them here on the show, Cora. So also hats off to you. I did not forget for a month ago that you predicted a few of those upsets in the NCAA tournament. But I think it's not fair to go ahead and say this team is, a Final Four bust because we're in May. And like you said, they have, some of the transfers are still at their old schools finishing up finals week right now. So like they're not even on campus technically yet right now for the team. So it's not fair to say it's Final Four bust or it's SEC title or bust or whatever. But, just early, like we're still several months away from the season starting. What are your kind of early kind of thoughts slash expectations for this team, and just kind of, how lofty do you think they should be or can be for this team?
I think it's a team, whereas last year, I think there was a feeling of, okay, we could, maybe they could, contend for the SEC title. Maybe they could make a run to the Final Four. And now I think it's no, they should. There's that kind of a confidence that they have the roster, they have the talent. I think Kelly said last SEC Media Days that she thought that their depth was one of their greatest strengths. And now, they have so much more depth this year. And I think that's key when it comes to, as we've seen, injuries. There's so many great players on this roster that, you don't want an injury to happen. But if one does, you have a just as talented player to step in. Like, there's so much depth here. So, South Carolina, they played with South Carolina for 3 quarters last season, kind of walking wounded. It's, I think the thing with South Carolina is, like, if you walk in thinking you're going to lose, you're going to lose. And they have some really good freshmen coming in. They're still going to have, Zaya and Bree and Aaliyah are going to be seniors. So, there's that experience there with really talented players. But, I think they'll compete with South Carolina. I think it's definitely a possibility. I think they should be contending for the SEC regular season title, the SEC tournament title, and everything like that. I think they put the roster together to do that.
Well, looking ahead here to also kind of looking at just a little bit around the SEC, you just mentioned, Tennessee hung with South Carolina. They didn't lose a whole lot. They didn't have to add a whole lot. So their roster doesn't have as much as an overhaul, I guess, as Lady Vols. Technically, Lady Vols didn't have an overhaul. It's just going to, really supplement and add to what was already a very solid roster last year. But I think it's pretty easy, in my opinion, to say that the Lady Vols kind of have the best transfer portal class in college basketball, and I don't know that there's really in contention for anyone that's second place is like that close to me, and honestly. But there are some pretty good ones, and a lot of them been in the SEC. You look at what LSU has done, who they've brought in. Look at what Kentucky has brought in. Look at what Florida has brought in. This to me, I think this SEC this year is not going to maybe be as deep top to bottom as this past season, but I think the top of it is going to be possibly even tougher than it was last year. And the top was already fairly tough last year, but I think this kind of top 5, 6, 7 teams of the SEC in women's basketball this next season is going to be very tough. It is going to be a lot of beating up on each other, I think, potentially, aside from potentially, the top 2 or 3 teams. But I think LSU was a team that I thought was going to have a big backslide in Kim Mulkey's second year. But I don't know. Now, after who they've added and stuff, Cora, they look like they could be a potentially a top 4 team in the SEC and get that double bye in the tournament. Like they've added a lot. Kentucky's added a lot. Florida, you were telling me before we started recording, Florida has added quite a bit as well. SEC is going to be, I think, fairly strong next year, and it's already been a really strong conference in women's hoops for a while. But I think it's going to be very, very interesting to watch next season.
Yeah, I think it'll be business as usual in the SEC. It's going to be one of the best, if not the best conference again in the country. Some of the transfers were within the SEC, and LaDasia Williams went to LSU from Missouri. Kentucky got um, South Carolina, Anaya Russell, I believe.
Hmm.
And so there's a lot of movement even just within the league. And then I think Kentucky got a different SEC transfer. Asia Petty from LSU. Kyra Elzy might have lost some players to the portal, but she has quite the incoming class and transfers. She's got, besides the two SEC transfers in Anaya Russell and Asia Petty from LSU, she's got, I'm probably going to say this wrong, even though I heard the Buffalo beat writer say her name. Adebola Deye from Buffalo, she's solid,
Yeah.
and she played at Thompson Bowling
Hmm.
when Tennessee played them, and she got really solid incoming class. So, I mean, Kentucky's gonna be good again next year. It's just kind of a matter of, again, probably pretty young. Robin Benton announced that she was coming back, so that's kind of a key veteran for them now that the rest of them are gone. Ryan Howard drafted, and the rest of them pretty much transferred, which was surprising. I think that's one of the more surprising transfer portal developments over the postseason was how many Kentucky players left after, winning the SEC tournament. But, Dre Edwards ended up at Baylor along with Asia Blackwell. So that's two SEC kids going to the Baylor. And I mean, that's huge for them after losing Nelissa Smith, Jordan Lewis. So, I mean, Baylor will be back right where they were. They'll be fine. And LSU has a pretty solid transfer class with Ohio State transfer, LaDasia Williams from Missouri. I'll be interested to see what Missouri does because I haven't seen a lot of movement from them, and they lost some key players, and I'm sure they had a senior or two in there. But Florida also had a pretty solid transfer class coming in. Leilani Correa from St. John's, KK Deans from West Virginia, and then Rashea Kyle from Purdue, 6'6" center. So Kelly Rae Finley will have a solid team, especially with Zippy Broughton and Jordan Merritt. Those two definitely impressed last year. So even though they're losing Kiki Smith, they are going to be solid once again. And I think what Kelly Rae Finley did in her first year, you can probably expect more of that. So SEC is going to be, again, probably a dogfight. But I do think that South Carolina and Tennessee are at the top right now when it comes to just looking at rosters, looking at talent. Ole Miss will be interesting to see how they try to fill that void of what Shakira Austin did, because I feel like she just did so much for them that, she's going to be hard to replace. So it'll be definitely interesting, but it will be very competitive once again.
Yeah, and I did see, speaking of Ole Miss, that today Coach Yo got an extension, I think also through 2026, I want to say. So that's also interesting. I have another SEC note as of today, like that we're recording this on Thursday, that Coach Yo got extended, and that was an interesting offseason because there was the rumor that Coach Yo was going to go leave Ole Miss for another job, and that didn't end up happening. So there was just it's been a very interesting offseason in SEC hoops on women's basketball with the Lady Vols and the transfer portal with now LSU in the transfer portal with also just the personality of Kim Mulkey being at LSU too, but. This is I imagine, Cora, as your job, like, covering Tennessee, but also like paying attention to the SEC at large. This has to be a really fun conference to cover and like keep up with because there's some interesting personalities out there, not just from coaches, but from some of the players too. I'll ask you kind of in a second, kind of some of your favorite stuff you got to cover for, the team this year, but this seems like a really fun conference and just personalities to cover in the SEC.
Yeah, I mean, and even speaking of just movement, I mean, you got Joni Taylor at Texas A&M now, so that's going to be,
Mm-hmm.
Fun to watch unfold to see what she does with that program. And then the new coach at Georgia, Katie Abrahamson Henderson. Sorry, that's a long name. But coming from UCF, she really built up that UCF program and brought some players with her. That Georgia roster is almost, pretty transformed. There's a lot of new players on that roster. So, I think it'll be very interesting. There's a lot of new faces in the SEC next year.
Well, Cora, I said I was going to mention it, and I was interested. I don't think we talked about this beforehand, but obviously all the stories you've written and stories you've covered, do you have a favorite kind of story, favorite moment from this past year that you got to talk about, or you got to see, or anything like that? Because I know this year was a lot of different things that you got to talk to a lot of different you kind of tell some of these stories and stuff. And I know as a reporter, that was always my favorite thing in sports media. And one of the things I like doing here on the show when I get to talk to the players is sharing those stories. So was there anything that really stood out to you this year, and any one person, any one story that really that it's kind of stuck with you, or that was your favorite thing to talk about this season?
Oh, that's a hard question.
It doesn't have to be one. If you have a couple of things, you can pick whatever you want to. This is kind of a moment to I want to shine a light on some of your work, because I know you've done a lot this year. So if there's anything you want to do, that I'll add links into the description to everybody go back and read it.
Yeah. I don't know. I feel like I really liked that story I did at the end of the season. I think it was like the week after the season ended, where I talked to Kelly in Wichita. And it was just like a 10-12 minute conversation. But, we talked about just a little bit about her journey as a coach, and like how, she tried to basically do this before NC State. And it was a really, obviously, much harder situation, but, just taking over a legendary program like that, and then that not working out for her. And then, finding her confidence again at Missouri State, and then how, Tennessee was just the right time for her. And, look at what she's done, basically. And I just think anytime I get to talk with Kelly like that is really fun for me, because I get to kind of see, understand her more as a coach. And she's really such a pleasure to work with. The more I hear about, other people's jobs, my friends in beat writing, Tennessee is a really good place when it comes to access and, the relationships I have. Like, it was so easy to form these relationships, and everyone's like really appreciative of the work I do. So it's been, really awesome to, get to know the coaching staff, get to know the players. It's too hard to pick between the player stories, because there's too many. I loved that Alexis Dye feature I got to do at the end of the season. She was, her coaches, like talking to her former coaches, like her story was so cool, going from junior college to literally Tennessee. So, there's so many great stories to be told. And next year I'm going to have a lot. So I'm excited. And for now, I've just been doing some softball stuff, which has been great. But yeah, I think getting to know the coaches, especially, when I get to talk to Sam and Joy as well, has been super fun.
Yeah, I was going to ask, you mentioned you got to talk to, the assistants. What are, I know we all get to see kind of Coach Sam Williams' personality on display because of her TikToks and everything that she does. But what is it like to actually sit down and talk with her? Actually, I guess kind of one-on-one, or just in person, because she seems like she has a really, I like her personality just for everything I've seen from her online.
Yeah, I think the one thing that about my conversations with Sam is, like, every time she's talking, like, it's not necessarily like commanding, but you just know that she has so much knowledge and so much experience, and speaks from this place where she has so much knowledge, and you can like ask her anything and she'll have like a great answer. She knows so much about the game, and has been in this for so long that it's fun to talk to her, just to kind of get her opinion on things. Like when I talked to her about the transfer portal, her perspective is so fun to hear, because she's been with so many different great programs and has accomplished a lot as an assistant, and had a short head coaching stint before she got offered at Tennessee, which was somewhere she was just like, I can't turn that down. So she's really cool to talk to, just because I feel like I could ask her about anything and she would have a very good answer. She just knows a lot. And then Joy is she's great. She's very personable. She's very friendly, funny, she's super easy to talk to. And both of them were great additions to Kelly's staff.
How many times did you get to, at a game, get to see or talk to Jackson or any of Kelly's kids?
I've never been formally introduced or introduced myself, just because I'm like, I've like seen him, walked by him a couple times, and I'll like wave at him and be like, hey, and he just kind of is like, okay. But I don't want to be like weird. So I've never like gone up to them and like whoever's watching them been like, hi, like maybe probably next year I'll get to do that. He's got a big personality, so I'm sure he would love to talk about things for a story about being Kelly Harper's son, so, but yeah, he's a funny kid.
Well, we're all waiting on the story in Cora. And you got to talk to Candace Parker's daughter, Layla, and that was cool to see that. So we're all waiting on the on the big Jackson feature for Knox News. But it's been fantastic having you on again. And I'm glad you're able to come on here. And as you mentioned, softball's been keeping you busy. The end of Lady Vols season's been keeping you busy too. With it seems like they've had so much news with additions and stuff to the roster that I know it's been a busy time for you. And hopefully, things are slowing down a little bit now as the softball is getting close to the postseason and summer comes up, and hopefully you have a little bit of a break. But it's been wonderful having you on here again. Thank you so much. And I do, kind of mentioned it already, some of the past things you've written about, but have anything you've come out with recently, anything come out soon? I know, again, you've been doing a lot of softball coverage, but I know, again, our listeners here, Lady Vol fans, love just athletics in general. Not all of them are just basketball fans. A lot of them pay attention to softball, pay attention to a lot of the sports on campus. So if there's anything you want to plug for the softball team, anything you want to plug about basketball, now's the time. And obviously, you all who are listening probably know who Cora is, but if you don't, she is at Coral Hall with 3 L's on Twitter, but also, as I mentioned, top of the show, writes for Knox News.
Yeah, I think honestly, the only thing I want to plug is we have a story that should be out soon. I believe it's supposed to go out on social media tomorrow morning about the bill that is been passed through the Senate and the House and is now on Governor Lee's desk about basically banning transgender women from competing at the collegiate level in Tennessee. So me and our education reporter have been working on a story for quite a while, kind of talking about the issue and kind of laying out what's been happening in Tennessee with anti-transgender legislation. So that will be out soon, and I would encourage everyone to read it and to, talk about it. I think it should be an open discussion. I think people need to talk about it because I think that's one of the things that has kind of led to this. People just haven't talked about it, or people don't want to talk about it because it doesn't personally affect them. So that will be out soon, and I hope everyone reads it.
Very good. When it comes out, I'll try to retweet it, and maybe even this episode will come out before it gets put on social, but I'll go back and update the description of this. So if you're listening to this sometime Friday afternoon or over the weekend, this description on YouTube and the podcast should be updated with the link to the story that Cora just mentioned. So again, thank you for that, Cora. I'll be sure to update everything once that actually gets posted, because I agree with you. I think it is something that needs to be talked about, because it doesn't get talked about. At least not to the degree it should or that it deserves. So again, that's Cora at Coral Hall on Twitter with 3 L's for her last name there, at Coral Hall, and she writes about Tennessee athletics, Tennessee women's athletics for Knox News. And thank you again, Cora, for coming on for the Lady Vol Basketball Fever podcast. Again, thank you all so much for listening. You can give this video a like. We really appreciate that. Subscribe to the channel on YouTube if you haven't done that yet, and share this around with all the Lady Vol fans you may know in your life. And subscribe to the podcast if you haven't. So I got to plug everything here. So thank you all so much. Join our I guess last thing I'll plug is join our Twitter community if you haven't yet. Vol Basketball Fever on the Twitter communities. It's just a nice little hub we have there for Vol basketball fans and Lady Vol basketball fans to kind of get in there and just talk about basketball if you want to. Trying to get more engagement in there. We've got a few people who've posted things in there as well, just kind of talk about stuff here in the off season. I'm sure once we get in November and the season's here for both teams, it'll be even more hopping. But join now while you are thinking about it here. I'm mentioning it here on the show. Go ahead and join it, and we'll greet you in there and say, hey, welcome into our new members. So thank you all so much for listening. Signing off for Cora, I am Nathaniel, and this has been another episode of the Lady Vol Basketball Fever podcast.